Hello again. I am Meghan Rose. Welcome to another episode of the Star-Crossed podcast. We are here this week to talk about a major transit that is going to be sitting with us until 2033. And the transit that I'm talking about is Uranus shifting into Gemini. So if you are astro curious, if you would consider yourself an astrology expert, you've probably already been on the lookout for this transit. Uranus is an outer planet. Uranus, technically by mythological standard, is supposed to be the god of the sky and the heavens. It is a planet that deals with sudden shakeups, changes. It's been dubbed the king toppler or the king maker. And in my own personal experience now working with thousands of clients and doing this work professionally for almost a decade, I feel like anytime that I'm looking at where Uranus is sitting in someone's chart, but also Uranus transits, that they tend to bring something of what the more pop astrologers would say that Jupiter brings, this good luck, good fortune, expansion, money, all of these things happening out of seemingly thin air. And to me, when we track and sit with Uranus, I feel like his energy is so much more prone to these kind of windfalls and unexpected experiences than Jupiter. Jupiter is an expander. It kind of takes whatever it touches and turns it much bigger and more exacerbated. But Uranus has this tendency of touching something or someone and in almost a magical way, turning it into something that it wasn't, or bringing about something that did not exist into life and light. And I want to talk about this transit because I've gotten a lot of feedback from, my followers when I ask, what do you guys want to hear about on the podcast, or talk with the members in my Star-Crossed Substack members chat and ask them what they're curious about, what's kind of coming up for them, what they want to focus on more. And for whatever reason, Uranus in Gemini has been the hot button topic. Really, I'm at a crossroads right now with my own role as an astrologer, where I see so many people stepping into the scene. And as much as I love the interest in astrology, especially as someone who used to be so deeply outcasted and bullied by the fact that I had this interest, I love to see that more people are embracing and accepting this pattern recognition and this belief system, and not yet science, but at some point when we have more acceptance and understanding will 100% be considered factual and honest and real. I mean, it's undeniable when we look at what has happened in the past, correlate that to transits, look at what's happening now, correlate that to transits, look at people's birth charts, correlate that to their placements. It's just a matter of time. But the reason that I got on that riff is because it seems like everyone and their brother is taking on the title of astrologer. And my only worry with where we are and where it might go is people sharing sourced information, like almost like a game of telephone. So this is also a really important next 7 years to watch where you're getting your information. Gemini energy, it's traditionally ruled by Mercury. So we have to understand that this is so much about ideation, speaking, writing, thinking, and those things are going to be disrupted. The way that we define things, the way that we share things, the way that we think about things, that is what is on the metaphorical chopping block with Uranus and Gemini. But before we dive too deeply into this, I want to give some kind of basis and understanding to Uranus and his impact based on what we have already gone through. So Uranus, the last time that it was in Gemini, we were in the middle of World War II. The time before that, we had a civil war. I'm not saying that this whole 7-year period is about war and that it's outside of our control. What I am saying is it tends to bring people who are in power into this more heightened state of wanting to redefine. So whether that be redefining borders, redefining laws, redefining their government systems, redefining whether or not somebody who is in a place of power gets to stay alive or not, it's like so it's so poignant to me to bring the people who have the most influence to light when we go through outermost transits, because it really is this trickle down effect with the outer planets. Meanwhile, planets like Mercury, Mars, Venus, the moon's cycles, we feel those on a much more individual level. But when these outer planets shift, like we have a Saturn transit shifting, a Uranus transit shifting, Neptune or Pluto, we tend to correlate those with more either generational things that are happening, or we start to see them with people who are influential or in a position of power, mass groups being impacted first because it's an outer planet. It deals with things on a more societal scale rather than on an individual scale. However, it is definitely going to impact the wave that we are riding in the ocean of life. So, and in the past, I've used transits and their impact on all of us in the metaphor of riding on a plane as well. So not only do these outer planets impact us more societally and more kind of externally and on a greater scale, but it impacts people who have correlating placements more so than it would someone who is not having these transits happen to one of their natal planetary placements or making harsh aspects to any of their planetary placements. So I've been saying with Uranus and Gemini that the next 7 years are really going to be the most impactful for those of us that have mutable placements, being Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. This past 8 years with Uranus and Taurus, we had the fixed signs being the most impacted. So people with Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius placements really feeling the heavy impact of the past 8 years. And I've also started dubbing Uranus and Taurus as the COVID placement. Taurus, in its generality, deals with the body. It deals with earthly elements. It deals with money, a sense of stability, a sense of self-worth. Yes, luxury, but economics on a more kind of baseline scale when we're talking about an outer planet being in Taurus. And we had so much disruption to our healthcare systems, the economy, had cryptocurrency come onto the scene and become so much more prevalent, blockchain technology, Web3. AI also came up during Uranus in Taurus and is now, going full throttle in Uranus and Gemini. And I want you to think about twofold where Taurus is in your birth chart and understand that impact over the last 8 years, but then looking now at which house or planets are ruled over by Gemini in your birth chart so you can better understand what now until 2033 is going to bring forward for you. Of course, it's going to be so different because the implication of Uranus, the planet of sudden shakeups and changes and disruption, being in a sign like Taurus is just inherently going to be so different from this planet of sudden shakeup and changes being in the sign of Gemini. I joke a lot about the zodiac wheel and how there's no coincidence of the signs that come after one another, almost like there is a pendulum trying to swing in the opposite direction between signs. So, we start with Aries, which is so brash, so bold, so me-centric, so willing to take risks and make change. That shifts then into Taurus, which is slow moving, and it's hard to manipulate or change its mind. There's such a focus on comfort and stability, knowing exactly what the next day is going to look like, let alone the next 10 years. And then to go from Taurus to Gemini, which is what we're dealing with now with Uranus shifting into Gemini, that energy is extremely fast moving. It is chaotic. It is undefinable. So when we think about Uranus being impacted by Gemini's energy, I mean, the real big thing that's been coming forward for me is trends. Like how we as a society have really fallen into thinking that we all need to look a certain way. And again, with Taurus dealing with the body, dealing with luxury, being ruled by Venus, so it deals with beauty, the beauty standards and the body standards and people only wearing things that are trending and losing a sense of self-concept outside of what feels comfortable, clean, aesthetic. And I wrote a lot about this on my Starcross Substack post, where this shift of Uranus and Gemini feels to me like we are finally breaking free of this like clean girl aesthetic and needing to fit into a box and embracing our weird again. And it's funny, I mean, whimsy has been such a hot buzzword lately, but I really do see Uranus and Gemini being a period of time where everybody can embrace whimsy. Gemini, to me, because it's so dualistic, it's the twins, it's mutable energy, it's ruled by Mercury, it's an air sign. There's a fastidiousness to the way that we are thinking, where we can finally break free from thinking that there is a right way to think. And I do believe that that is why so many people have gravitated towards ChatGPT, because it takes away the sense of fear and rejection around thinking outside of the box and sharing your authentic truth and getting curious. Because if you can outsource your thought process and you can rely on that being crowdsourced from the internet and other people's input, then there's really no risk in thinking the way that ChatGPT is telling you to think, because you know that it can be validated and verified off of all of the information that it's getting from everybody else. And I think that's a very dangerous place for us to be in as individuals. But if enough individuals are doing this, us as a human race, it's a slippery slope. I talk about neuroplasticity, and for whatever reason, I also tend to attract a lot of people who work in neurobiology or brain scans or philosophy or psychology to work with me one-on-one. And I love that, especially as a Scorpio stellium myself. It's like, I love to go deep. I love the fact that the channeled messages that are coming through me correlate and make sense with people who I admire so deeply because of their ability to study the brain and help other people use their brains and preserve their brains. And maybe that's part of where my take on generative AI and platforms like ChatGPT and using that as a quasi-therapist or a friend, or I mean, there's people marrying ChatGPT now. Like Uranus and Taurus was not joking around, where it was like, I see this thing, I like this thing, I marry this thing. Like it's so desiring of stability and the known. And hopefully, because Uranus and Gemini has this imprint on it to me of disruption and more suddenness and quicker change and quicker disruption than Uranus and Taurus had. And it's not so tangible. It's not about the body. It's not about the economy. It's not about the ecosystem. It's about our thoughts. It feels like we've been talking about this for a long time, like psychological warfare. And I forget the name of the movie that Julia Roberts was in recently, where it was the end of the world and they had all the pileups of the Teslas, and you know, these like governmental systems started being able to, sorry if you can hear that ahead of time. I'm living in Italy now, so the amount of disruption that I get from what they call the Roman, oh, I'm gonna have to cut this out. the Rome soundtrack of having all of the sirens go off all day long. I can always tell when the energy is heightened by how many sirens are going off outside of my office window. No, but back to this, the movie about the end of the world, and part of the attack that the government had taken on people was psychological warfare and like being insidious and attacking people through the way that they were thinking and through the technology that they were using and having the technology turn back on them. And I keep telling people, I'm like, as much as people don't want that to happen and they don't want fear mongering from people who are acting as oracles or astrologers or psychics, that really comes back to the way that I run my practice as well, where you always have free will. So if you are worried about things like technology turning on us and psychological warfare and your brain and your thought process being this malleable thing that anybody and everybody has access to and they can take advantage of, you have to have discernment and integrity with your mind. This to me is a perfect example of the period of time that we're entering into, where I, as an astrologer, can tell you everything that I know and the patterns that I have recognized in the relations that I've created with these planets and these signs and how they will impact us individually and societally. But at the end of the day, we always have free will. So if you do not want to be a part of a reality that operates like that, you have to be willing to go the extra mile and change the way that your mind, your personal information, your ability to think, your ability to create is interacting with the world. You have to be willing to set safeguards on the thing that is the most human about you, which is your ability to think and create and imagine and intuit the world around you. I think this is also an incredible period of time to come away from more of the negative and dive into what I think is going to be so positive about this transit. I think this is going to be an incredible, incredible period of time for platforming people who are existing authentically. And if you feel like you've been going out in the world, dealing with other people, trying to play by these social hierarchies, and you can't understand any of it because you don't operate the way that everybody's operating, as much as it's probably felt like a bitch and a burden for the entirety of your life leading up until this point, I see this period of time being incredible for people who don't operate by playing games and only know how to show up in the world authentically, and kind of taking away giving so much power to people's perception of you or the projections that they're placing onto you. If you have a strong self-concept, I see Uranus and Gemini these next 7 years up until 2033 just being the most masterful period of time to share your thoughts, share your ideas, share your truth, be more authentic, be more real, be more curious about the world around you. Start doing and saying things that are outside of your comfort zone with more confidence, really embracing your own dualistic nature and your adaptability. If you can keep up with the speed in which the world is about to be operating at, I think there's going to be a lot of people that start to see breakthrough success because they just simply didn't play the game. They didn't fall into the trap. They weren't following trends. They weren't trying to appease somebody outside of themselves. They weren't trying to be liked by the masses. And that shit's magnetic. Like, people are going to start feeling more drawn now more than ever to people that are just being themselves, and unpredictably so. Like, yes, there is something calming and reassuring by being able to finish somebody's sentence or going out in public and you're like, oh my God, I have that shirt on too. Like, it's almost this falsified sense of intimacy that we got during Uranus and Taurus, where everybody was, trauma bonding. I'm surprised. Like, if that wasn't the Webster Dictionary word of the year at some point over the last 8 years, I swear to God, like, I need somebody to make a revision, because it feels like this over therapization of oneself and other people. And trust me, like, I fell into the self-help book trap 100%. I actually at one point had a roommate that was like, I don't trust anybody that only has self-help books on their nightstand. And I really had to take a hard look in the mirror and be like, damn, like, I am so much more than what I've been through. And instead of trying to understand the why behind like all of my behavior, all of everybody else's behavior, which I 100% also accredit to like definitely being an undiagnosed neurodivergent person. And it's like, I just like truly do not understand human interaction. And I am so fascinated by human beings, but like psychology and self-help are separate entities. All of this to say, if you can get out of that like trauma bonding and needing to like know somebody just because you've gone through the same things, like COVID was definitely a huge turning point during that transit of Uranus and Taurus, where it was just like, okay, well, everybody feels comfortable at home and everybody feels comfortable talking about that. Like, it almost became the new surface level conversation outside of like, how's the weather this week? Which also is just so Taurian to me. Like, the amount of Taurus people that it's like, if I get caught up in a conversation long enough with them, how's the weather comes up at least once, twice, maybe 3 different times in 3 different ways. So Uranus and Gemini really pushes that envelope, and it says like, how can we get curious about your interests? How can we get curious about like who you actually are underneath it all? I see there being a big push to almost like voyeurism, or the ability to see or peer into somebody's life almost in a way where they are not aware that it's happening. Like, not so much Truman Show esque, but like streaming while you're doing the dishes, or like streaming a girls' night that you and your friends are having at the house. Like, I think there's going to be something almost simulation, like The Sims-esque, about the type of content that's going to go really viral during this period of time. Voyeurism, for whatever reason, has been coming up a lot in my like lived experience in the conversations that I'm having. So I also feel like anytime those rumblings happen, I'm like, I have to channel that and share that with my community, because there's something there. Like, there's a reason that it keeps coming up. Also, like the resurgence of people like Michael Jackson, and everybody idolizing him and viewing him as a victim. And to be totally transparent with you, like, I'm on that same wavelength. I remember calling out of school and staying home during his massive funeral service, and like bringing the coffee table over to the couch and like dancing between the two all day long, like listening to his music and like bawling my eyes out while he was in his casket, and like everybody going through that whole process. It's like, I jokingly say this a lot, where I'm like, I'm not always right, but I'm never wrong. Like, if I feel some type of way about somebody and it's negative, I'm just waiting for other people to figure it out at some point. If I feel overwhelmingly positive about a person, even if they're on everybody else's shit list and like nobody wants to hang out with them, it's like, okay, we'll give them a minute, and then they're finally going to find their footing and everybody else will see that. But this kind of stark differentiation between how people are starting to view Michael Jackson in today's day and age, when like back then he was lambasted, like nobody was on his side. He was viewed as a creep and like a pedophile and like all of these things. And then there's people like Jeffrey Epstein, who back in the day were like widely received, but now after his death, like there's this viewpoint, obviously, of like him and all of his cronies changing. And I feel like Uranus and Gemini is really going to play with that dualistic nature, where however somebody has been received and perceived is going to shift, and like giving everybody the opportunity to view life through somebody else's perspective or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. I think that's why we're seeing the fall of white supremacy. I think that's why we're seeing the fall of the patriarchy, is not as some punishment. Like, I don't believe that anybody based on things that they cannot change about themselves is better or worse than another person. I think the only defining factor about how much power you should have in this lifetime is based on who you are and the merit of who you are as a person and who you are when nobody else is looking. Um, and I think that that's going to become the new norm and the reality of the world that we start to live in. I've loved seeing all of the hot takes circulating on the internet since Uranus shifted into Gemini. I think we're only going to see more of that, where it's like the very stuck, regurgitated ways that people have thought as a society are about to shift in big ways as people are waking up during this transit and going, wait a second, that's not right. Or wait a second, that's not real. Or wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Or why haven't we been thinking about things in this way? I also believe that education and academia as a whole are going to kind of trudge to the front of the pack. There's going to be so much more of a yearning and a necessity for people to get their information from actual wise sources now that we have so much of our knowledge sharing being overtaken by AI. And my issue with this is the same issue that I've had as somebody who, like, every once in a while will rewatch comfort films. Like, I typically cannot listen to or repeat or rewatch anything. Like, that is definitely a mental tick of mine. But when there are those select few like songs that I can play on repeat or movies that I can watch more than once, I definitely like hold strong to those. I have multiple Taurus placements, like don't shoot the messenger on that one. But I recently hosted one of my childhood friends at my place in Italy, and on one of the days where we were both exhausted, we decided to watch Hercules. And I looked over at her at one point and I was like, is the animation on this different? And she said no. But then I went and looked it up and it's like, yeah, all of these films are being reworked. And maybe a week later, I had seen the difference on, I think it was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like one episode that they still have on streaming versus the original episode. And they had like cut out a bunch of it. They reworked some of it. And I am worried for us as a society with information sharing and story sharing and how that's going to change so drastically from this point onward because of the infiltration and the use of AI reworking everything. Like, it's so easy to, create like Mandela effect style issues with how people who had like been there for the original information or art will remember and share that information and art with the generations to come, but it won't match what the generations going forward are ingesting information wise or art wise. So we really need to be cognizant as a society about the preservation of culture. And I do think that that's why there's been a lot of swinging back to conservatism and traditionalism. As much as I don't agree with a lot of ways that that's happening, it's like one situation that I do empathize deeply with is what's happening in Paris and how so many Parisian people are like, well, we don't like want all of these changes happening in our city because our city is essentially this like encapsulated bit of history and art and culture. And if we keep changing all of it, will it ever be able to be enjoyed for what it was? And I live now in a city that's multiple thousands of years old in the way that it's been preserved and enjoyed. And yes, you have to repaint, and yes, you have to wash, and yes, you have to, like lay down new cobblestones from time to time. But the ethos of the city itself is so deeply honored and preserved. So I think during Uranus and Gemini, there's going to be a lot of redefinition of what things were, the way that songs sounded, the way that movies looked, the way that cities felt, the way that people treated and spoke to one another. And we have to be really intentional on an individual scale in order to avoid all of the redefinition happening in a net negative way. It's also going to be impacting every sign so differently. So again, I come back to looking at your birth chart, looking at whether or not you have Gemini placements. Sagittarius placements are always also going to be deeply impacted because it's the opposite of Gemini. So whatever Sagittarius placements you have will be in opposition to this Uranus and Gemini. And then Virgo and Pisces placements will be at a square with Uranus and Gemini for the next 7 years. So it's an intensification on whether or not you're able to adapt. It's an intensification on your need to be authentic in order to stand out and get the life that you want. It is a deeply transformational time that we are in, and we are going to further dive into. But I also look at repeating patterns with transits as more of a cyclone. Like, yes, it's going over the same x-axis, but the y-axis is different. So we're getting to see the same energy from a new perspective now. So at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned how the last couple of times that we had Uranus and Gemini, there was World War II in the 40s. And then back before this, we had the Civil War. We also had the Irish Civil War. We had the French Revolution. Like, there was so much transpiring. And that's why I'm like, I see it getting less and less each time that Uranus and Gemini is here. But we have to understand, like, I mean, the United States currently has a Gemini running the office wrongfully. It's, we can see how erratic this energy, this Gemini energy is when it's in its shadow expression. So it's really important to lean on the positive expression of Gemini, which is being curious, being connective, being a great networker, thinking outside of the box, being innovative, being adaptable, being just light and fluid. I think there's something so brilliant about this energy that gets villainized so often. And I mean, like, I got called up recently by Yahoo to answer questions about Gemini men after Billie Eilish made her comment about all Gemini men can go to hell, but I love Gemini women. And it's like, girl, like, I'm not allowed to say the quiet part out loud, but I spoke with this reporter about an ex of mine who was a Gemini, and the relationship in and of itself was on and off, which is so the ethos of being with a Gemini, and ended because he slept with one of my friends. And that also feels like the ethos of Gemini when it's in its shadow expression. The need for novelty, the need for newness, the inability to feel contentment, the constant fast-paced movement that feels deeply frenetic and erratic. Like, yes, those things can be true of Gemini's expression if we are not being intentional with it. So my urge with this episode is be intentional with it on an individual scale. Like, let yourself get so deeply curious. Let yourself be more authentically you than ever before. Let yourself dress outside of the box, think outside of the box, speak ideas out into the world that help other people think outside of the box. Like, how can we all utilize this energy and band together for the betterment of society, the betterment of the way that we share information, the betterment of how we are able to transact funds or immigration statuses or travel, whether that be on a plane, a train, a car, a bus, on foot, on a bike, whatever it is. It's like, how can we make our close neighborhoods better and more connected? And I think this is going to be so brilliant when it's coupled with Pluto and Aquarius, because we're already getting urged from an outer planet to go towards the barter system and community and thinking in a way that has observed all of the pains and ego and wrong and hardship of society and says, I don't really want to do that anymore. Like, why does everybody in my apartment building all need to buy a vacuum cleaner and all need to buy an espresso machine and all need to buy, like 16 blankets or whatever it is? It's like, what if we did go back to asking our neighbor for a cup of sugar while we were baking, and then after we were done, we gave them out to everybody within like walking distance of where we lived? I think there's something powerful about leaning on other people, and the coupling of Pluto and Aquarius until 2043 and then Uranus and Gemini until 2033 is that we have this opportunity to kind of tie these two trine, like air sign, outer planet energies together and say, let's think outside of the box together. And I don't want you to feel afraid of this. I don't want you to get confused about where your sovereignty and your empowerment is during all of this. I want you to go into this feeling like you know who you are, you know what you want, you know what you would like the world around you to look like, and be the very person that you are seeking every time that you're scrolling on the internet, or seeking every time that you swipe on a dating app, or seeking when you go outside of the house. If you wish that people would strike up deep conversations or smile at you when they walked by or help somebody who was hurting, you have to be willing to be that villager. A village's energetic makeup is made up by all of the villagers within it. It's kind of like a middle finger to the old influencer culture. I also see with Uranus and Gemini that we're shifting out from that Uranus and Taurus, like, oh, this person, just because they got the right amount of plastic surgery and like body work done and they have 2 million followers, that they get all of these free things, and we sit around and watch them like open up all of these halls and they don't look grateful or excited when they're doing it, to companies like Array, who does supplements, who gives out all of their gifting first to their most loyal customers, or like Crocs recently gifting Dylan from Love on the Spectrum his like most desired pair of Patrick and SpongeBob Crocs that he had been looking for years. Like, that type of integration of humanity, I see that expanding out with Uranus in Gemini, where it's like, we don't really care about loud luxury and making rich people more rich. We actually care about interesting people and people who are authentic and people who are true to themselves and people who want to see the world be a better place for all people. So I know the last 8 years have been so challenging. I lived them as well. And as somebody with 7 planets in Scorpio, 3 placements in Taurus, like, I was really feeling the disruption of Uranus and Taurus for the last 8 years. And I want not only to be able to take a deep breath again, but I want that for everybody else, where we don't go into this thinking it just has to be more of the same. It just has to feel the same way. Like, Taurus energy is rooted in sameness. Gemini energy is rooted in newness. And I am hoping, praying, and actively trying to commit myself and my life to making a world that works for all people, even if it's in small ways. And I hope that listening to this has given you some deeper level of understanding about how you have free will. And if you can go into these next 7 years with Uranus in Gemini, knowing that your voice matters, and the more authentic you are, the less you have to play games, and the less confused you have to feel about the world that you live in, because there's nothing confusing about the truth. So if you would like more insights into how this is going to impact you specifically based on your birth chart, I have already written out in-depth horoscopes for all 12 of the zodiac signs based on mainly your rising sign, but you can read it for any of your personal placements, your sun, moon, rising, Mercury, Mars, or Venus. I'll link that in the show notes just so you have an individual game plan and some action orientation for the next 7 years. And you can go into this not feeling afraid. You can go into this feeling empowered and excited. So those will be on my Substack, on the Star Cross Substack with Meghan Rose. And it's been a gift and a pleasure to be able to sit down and have this chit chat with you. I mentioned this already, but if you are a paid subscriber to the Substack, you can always reach out in our members chat and send in questions for future podcast episodes, topics that you want covered. Your voice matters so much in our community, and it's been such an amazing little pocket of the internet to have all of you guys together. I'm so deeply grateful for all of you. And I'm so elated to bring the podcast back and to expand our star-crossed community and all of the offerings that are coming up. And I want to make sure that it feels incredible for you. So if there's more that you're hoping for, there's more that you'd like to hear or see from me, that members chat is always open. And as always, it has been a pleasure to sit down with you on the Starcross podcast. My name is Meghan Rose. I'll see you next time.